This is the most OP Pokemon they have ever released. Completely broken, disgusting, insanely OP. I mean, so gross. This thing is broken. That's what you want me to say, right? That's every YouTube thumbnail. That's every comment. Look, it's either broken or it's useless, and I think people are going to be disappointed to find out that this Pokemon is neither. It's that time of year again. A new Pokemon has come to Pokemon Unite, and I am here to tell you whether or not you should buy this Pokemon. I wish I had a third arm, kind of pop it in there with like a should you buy this Pokemon. Enough. So let's get into Inteleon, our newest ranged attacker coming to Pokemon Unite. I think all attackers are ranged. I think that's a necessity of their class, but moving on. Our newest attacker coming to Pokemon Unite. It is a special attack Pokemon, and it's interesting because Inteleon's role actually feels like a combination of a few things. It feels like early game, it's a very powerful sort of lane mage-like Pokemon, similar to an Espeon or something like that. No joke. Inteleon's water gun is one of the best early moves in the entire game, hands down. And then as the match progresses, it moves away from that and it sort of moves into a moderately mobility focused attack damage carry, similar to a Cinderace or kind of Decidueye, depending on how you build it. I think one thing to say up top about Inteleon is that I think Inteleon is a more complex Pokemon than people probably will give it credit for. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised with the level of patience this Pokemon takes to play. Because here's the thing, right? It's not just pew 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 all the time. You've got to generate these guaranteed critical hit counters and then go pew 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 pew. Very different situations. I talked a little bit about this a minute ago, but let's talk just briefly about kind of what role this fills on a team. Again, early, I feel like in lane, it's a monstrous lane mage type Pokemon. And then as the game progresses, you almost use this Pokemon at extreme range at times, zoning your enemies, and then finally deciding to move in and strike with your Unite move. It feels a lot different from some of the ranged attackers. Obviously, when you're playing something like Cinderace, Duraludon, Dragapult, you are staying at range, you are auto-attacking, but this requires another level of play because, as I mentioned before, you are juggling the fact that you don't always have critical hits, but when you do have critical hits, they are guaranteed. So you have this weird kind of wait for it, now, doing a ton of damage. And the rest of the time, I feel like you're zoning more with moves like Liquidation and Snipe Shot. So while I've mentioned them, let's talk about Liquidation and Snipe Shot. I'm telling you, Water Gun is the star of the show with this Pokemon. It is insane. Liquidation and Snipe Shot are both variations of I don't love them. That was my impression of not loving something. I like them both mechanically. They are both fun in different ways, and they are both frustrating in different ways. So let's start with Snipe Shot. Snipe Shot is a very long-range sniper move that can only hit one enemy Pokemon. It stops with an enemy, however, it goes through wild Pokemon. And it's also telegraphed, so enemies can see where you are shooting from. You can see sort of the laser sight that your Pokemon is aiming with. I both like and don't like this. However, I would say more than dislike, I actually like it. I think it's pretty cool for a few reasons. Number one, the move does so much damage. To have no idea where Inteleon is shooting from feels pretty crazy. Number two, I actually like using the sniper sight just to mess with my opponents because you can see them reacting to how you are aiming on the map. And I actually think that's really fun. I know there's some strategy involved in not aiming at your opponents and then flicking your stick back to aim at them very quickly. I actually think throughout the games that I've played, that's probably more impressive but cheesy than it is useful. I actually think there's a ton of value in your opponents seeing that sniper shot, and then you can aim at a later target. You can even not shoot sometimes, but you can feel how it makes them move around the battlefield, not wanting to get hit by these shots. Of course, this also reveals your position to your opponents and gives them opportunities to dive in on you, and Inteleon is very punishable, which we'll get to in a moment. Let's talk about Liquidation here. Liquidation is the pew 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 pew. I can't stop. And while this move is cool, it's also confusing in some ways. It slows you down while you're using it, which feels super unfortunate because, again, this Pokemon is pretty punishable for something to dive in on you. And it also doesn't do as much damage as you think it should. It feels like this should be something to engage, but oftentimes this is something that you use just to poke your opponents with or get someone who's fleeing. And I think once you start to understand that, you get way more value out of Liquidation. So I've talked about it a few times. Let's talk about how punishable this Pokemon is. And like many Pokemon of this ilk, these sort of sniper, ranged attacker sort of things, this is very punishable. A lot like a Decidueye, this is an easy Pokemon to shut down. And I think that will be most people's biggest complaint with this Pokemon is that even though it's camouflage, which makes it so you can't target it with auto attacks, you still know where it is, essentially. You can see it on the map, and it's pretty easy to dive in on and do a ton of damage. And Pokemon Unite is full of Pokemon that can dive and do a ton of damage. From your Zoroarks and your Leafeons to your Zarinas and your Machamps, all the way to your Lucaris. You get it. There are just tons of Pokemon that can, you know, cover extreme distance, get right next to Inteleon, and make Inteleon's day horrible. So you have to know, if you are buying a Pokemon like this, this is what you're signing up for. There are going to be some games that feel absolutely unwinnable with this Pokemon because you just simply don't have a good front line from your team, or the enemy team notices that you're an Inteleon. Like if they notice that you're an Inteleon and they just jump at you, you are in a lot of trouble. There is some outplay potential using an eject button, bouncing around with acrobatics or fell stinger to reposition yourself. You can outplay some of your opponents, and those moments are very satisfying. But in general, you are a heavily punishable Pokemon that needs to play in a deliberate style. Now let me get on to how it feels playing this Pokemon, because I think it's one of the most important things in Unite. I mention this all the time. One of the things Unite does best, if not the thing Pokemon Unite does better than anything else, is they make Pokemon that feel very much in line with what they are in the VGC or in the series, and they're extremely fun to play. Inteleon is no exception. I am having so much fun playing this Pokemon, which I think is incredibly important. There are some that come out and you could say, Comfey, very, very good, especially after the buffs, but is it the most fun Pokemon to play? I wouldn't say so. And then there are Pokemon like this that are an absolute blast to play. The playstyle feels very different. It feels super unique. Even though there are some issues with the Pokemon, maybe power-wise at times, or just sort of the fluidity. Isn't it funny that I didn't say the word fluidity right? Fluidity. That some of those mechanics maybe could be a little bit better. It's still really, really fun to play. Really fun to play. Now that I've talked about its power level, let's talk a little bit about the balance of this Pokemon and what I see in the future. If I could use Future Sight for a moment here, not the one on Espeon, the one coming up on Mewtwo, because it looks incredibly powerful. My Future Sight would tell me that this Pokemon is going to get a buff. I don't know if the buffs are going to be massive for this Pokemon, but I do think this Pokemon will get some slight touch-ups in an upcoming patch. I think in general, all of this Pokemon's moves feel close, but I think they could all be a little bit better. Snipe Shot maybe could be a little bit easier to hit some of your enemies. Liquidation could maybe do a little bit more damage, or maybe not slow you so much. Fell Stinger could probably give you an additional charge of critical hit, honestly, because Acrobatics is just a more consistent is the word I'm looking for here. More consistent and also less sort of punishable move to use to generate your critical hit counter right there. So the thing about Fell Stinger is if you happen to hit an enemy, you don't really get much from it at all, because you want to be hitting walls so that you can move away from a fight like pew, 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 and then get away, use your boosted attacks, maybe reposition for a Liquidation or a Snipe Shot. Acrobatics really doesn't have that same issue. If you hit an enemy, in fact, you get an additional critical hit counter. So I think right now Acrobatics is the clear second move choice. Fell Stinger could use a buff. In general, I think we could see light buffs for this Pokemon across the board, which is really exciting if you're enjoying this Pokemon, because I think it will get better over time, as opposed to something like Zacian on release, where there is not a reality at all where that Pokemon doesn't eventually get nerfed. So now is the point where I give you a recommendation as to whether or not you should buy this Pokemon. There have been Pokemon in the past that I've said, no, I don't think so. And there have been Pokemon in the past that I think, yes, you absolutely need to pick this up. This Pokemon for me sits kind of right in the middle, and it fully depends on whether or not you want to play something like this that's complicated. If you want ease of play, which by the way, I'm not knocking, I actually think is extremely important to have something that's easy to play and is really solid in matches, I don't think this is the best choice for you. However, if you want something that's a little more complex, you know you're going to run into games that are frustrating, but you also recognize that when you are playing this Pokemon at a high level, it is extremely rewarding, then I would definitely say pick up Inteleon. I really, really like this release. I would recommend a lot of people definitely try it out. It's up there for me as one of the funner releases in a little while. So if I have to go one way or another, I would say pick up Inteleon. Obviously, I've given you the caveats. I've given you the reasons you may not want to pick it up, but this is a Pokemon that I think has a bright future. I think it probably has some buffs coming for it, and the playstyle is extremely, extremely fun. Even though the Unite move stuns you for a second when you use it, it drives me absolutely crazy. But beyond that, I think this Pokemon's really cool. Let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear it if you've picked this up, if you've tried it in practice mode, or if you use the rental license and you have some thoughts on it. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think people should pick this Pokemon up? Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I love you, and I'll see you all next time.